You know how it goes. You wait months, years, sometimes even decades for a game to arrive, it finally comes out, and then it's just kinda not all that. Many go ahead and blame it all on the developers, but sometimes they're just as peed off as the rest of us, because sometimes devs don't get their own way due to publisher interference, time constraints, bad ideas that were ran with, or many other factors out of their control, likely from the top down. I'm Scott from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 times developers admitted their games sucked. Number 10, Last Oasis. Nomadic survival game Last Oasis puts us on an Earth that has stopped rotating, where the remains of humanity must remain continuously in motion to survive in the habitable zones between the planet's scorching sun face and icy cold darkness. It's a neat concept, but one developer/publisher Donkey Crew struggled with it from day one. Appropriately, it was neither especially hot nor cold on Steam when it dropped in 2020, selling in decent numbers, but gradually succumbing to negative reviews and various issues. Racked by server problems, Donkey Crew had to take the game offline for a week to work on it, and notwithstanding persistent issues afterwards, the developer plowed on with another survival game, Bellwright. Despite being Last Oasis's project lead and recognizing the declining sales of his own product, Florian Chads Hofreiter was one of the contributing voices of negative sentiment on Steam. He wrote an article entitled Last Oasis Sucks, in which he expounds on how he doesn't enjoy playing the game for very long and that it pales in comparison to other survival games. It certainly showed Chads understood what was wrong with Last Oasis from a gamer's perspective, but to come out so strongly against your own game was a slap in the face for those who actually bought in. Number 9, Shadows of the Damned. A collaboration between Massimo Guarini, Shinji Mikami of Resident Evil fame, and Suda51, Koichi Soda, owner of developer Grasshopper Manufacture, action-adventure game Shadows of the Damned had all the makings of a classic. There was just one problem. It was being overseen by EA. The game follows Garcia Hotspur, a Mexican demon hunter who must journey to the City of the Damned in order to face its evils and save his girlfriend Paula, captee of the Lord of Demons. With plenty of weapons, a punk rock, satanic style, and the right blend of cool and scary, it should have been a stone-cold success, but instead, it was DOA. The game sold very poorly, something Suda attributed to publisher EA's unwillingness to make a large enough cash investment in such a new IP. But that wasn't the origin of the project's issues. Suda in particular struggled to work productively with EA throughout the entire process, and was forced to rewrite his story over and over again, with the final product being something that he and Mikami, who served as executive director, were both disappointed in. Number 8, Devil May Cry 2. It's never easy following up a smash hit game, with many devs either following too closely to established lines, or in some cases not being able to handle the pressure, releasing something considerably inferior. Such is the case for Devil May Cry 2, which continued the story of demon hunter Dante as he embarked on a mission to stop shady international businessman and head of the Ouroboros Corporation Arius from raising the demon Argosax and becoming nigh unstoppable. I mean, fair enough. Unfortunately, it was helmed by a different Capcom team than had worked on the previous game, one lacking the experience to bring a sequel like this to fruition in the way fans expected. The game had a troubled production throughout, and though Hideaki Itsuno, who wound up directing 2, 3, 4, and 5, was brought on board in the middle of development, he just couldn't save it. Upon release, DMC2 was criticized by gamers and critics for, amongst other things, its lower difficulty, character changes to Dante's personality, and a less refined and strategic combat system. Itsuno later admitted the game's development time was way too short, that chunks of the game had been left unfinished or at least underdone, and that he'd not been very satisfied with it. This is why he asked to stay for the third game to make up for the failure. And honestly, DMC3 is one of the best action games ever made. Number 7, Payday 3. Taking place after the conclusion of Payday 2, where the gang, Joy, Houston, Clover, and Jacket went their separate ways and left the life of crime behind, Payday 3 brings them right back into the fray again, as they're double-crossed, lose their cash, and have to build it all the way back up by taking banks by force around New York City. This strong and simple premise carried the IP across several releases, expansions, and consoles, and Payday 3 should have been something of an easy win, if developer Starbreeze Studios could keep up with the times in all the right ways. Sadly, they just couldn't. The game was faced with severe criticism from most quarters on its release, due to a rather hollow and unfinished experience overall, server issues, and its new online-only model, the latter of which complaints conspired to make the game unplayable during outages. Far from immune to criticism, the Starbreeze crew were right in the thick of it, taking it on the chin and admitting their game was just not it. Community head Almir Listo conceded that the game should have had more development time, remarking that Payday 3 felt unfinished and was a bad experience for players. Similarly, lead producer Andreas Penninger admitted to a lack of due diligence and rash decision-making, resulting in a disappointing performance all round. Number 6, Postal 3. The Postal franchise has always been more than a bit rough around the edges, but that's part of the charm. Developed by Running with Scissors, these first-person shooter games allow players to embark on a total rampage, slaughtering as many people as possible and not caring whatsoever. What Running with Scissors have historically cared about, though, is the fun quotient of the game, driving quality through exciting Moorish gameplay, understanding that they're never going to be leaders in the likes of graphics or mechanics. Unfortunately, even by their own fairly low standards, they well and truly failed when it came to the third game in the series. Pressed for cash, Running with Scissors partnered with Russian studio Akela, and the whole thing went downhill from there. Postal 3 introduced too much fluff, delaying players from the carnage they came for. It crashed all the time and graphics were a new low. Just honestly unacceptable, as Running with Scissors' John Merchant and Vince Desi were all too aware. They described the game as a broken mess that they didn't even want to get paid for, saying they don't regard it as a Postal game at all, instead a spin-off that shouldn't have happened. They stood by these words, removing the game from their store and encouraging fans to try other titles instead. Number 5, Dead Island 2. Few players got to see Dead Island 2 as it was originally conceived, because the game we all played in 2023 was not the sequel originally put together for the 2011 zombie RPG. The original saw players stranded on a zombie-infested island that tested survival skills in the most dire of times, and was a wild success for such a new IP. Fans of the franchise were then right to wonder what happened to the second game, as after some months and years of publisher Deep Silver assuring everyone it was on the way, it just kind of fell off the map. The version that did finally appear in 2023 was, by all accounts, an entirely different game from the one that was originally tested by players in 2015, and there's a good reason why. Jaeger Development was first in line for developing the sequel back in 2012, but they were removed from the project after the game's 2014 announcement thanks to terrible tester feedback. Jaeger was replaced by Sumo Digital, but this partnership also went a similar way, and Deep Silver wound up putting their own internal studio Dambuster on the game in 2019, who dragged it to completion some 4 years later. Former Deep Silver head of comms Martin Wine went on record saying that each iteration had produced a game that was not fun, not engaging, and didn't feel like the Dead Island he knew and loved. Number 4, The Lord of the Rings Gollum. Lord of the Rings Gollum promised to return eager players to Middle-earth, seeing it through the eyes of Gollum, one of the most well-traveled yet unexplored, at least in terms of gaming, characters. Yet progress was slow on any official announcement of when it might appear, and the game's future looked less and less promising, until developer Daedalic Entertainment finally announced an official release. But that's just where problems began. A gameplay trailer released in 2022, with Daedalic signaling a release date later that year, triggered instant fan backlash. The game was criticized for resembling a previous generation console game with dodgy graphics, ropey characters, indistinct scenery, and atrocious coloring. Nobody wanted to believe that this was the next Lord of the Rings game, and the backlash was so severe, the developers pulled it to see what could be fixed. After several pushbacks and delays, the game was eventually released in 2023, but by then the damage was done, and damning reviews came in thick and fast, confirming every criticism that was faced pre-release. This led to Daedalic actually coming out and admitting the game was not what they wanted it to be, apologizing to the fanbase for not meeting anyone's expectations, and officially consigning it to the bin of video game history. Number 3, Dying Light 2. Techland's Dying Light was designed with gamers in mind, delivering an action-adventure survival game that really forced players to do everything they could to survive in a ridiculously exciting enemy-infested open-world environment. One where slow zombies roam the streets during the day and go all-out psycho at night. An instant hit with gamers. Yes, it was a little repetitive, but it was easy to see what the studio should retain and what it should jettison for the sequel. Unfortunately, Techland got it backwards, serving up a sequel in Dying Light 2 that went heavy on the parkour elements, but packed basically no grit or serious scares, the elements that made the first game the best. Franchise director Timon Smektala agreed, acknowledging that Dying Light 2 forgot about the first game's fanbase and lost the edge, the threat, the horror, and the tension. Number 2, E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial. Everyone knows how phenomenally successful Spielberg's E.T. was in 1982, and with such a new IP printing money, there had to be brand synergy and as many tie-ins as possible, stat. This meant, amongst other things, Atari rushing a video game into production, with Howard Scott Warshaw at the helm. Handpicked by the company and tasked with developing a finished game in 5 weeks, Warshaw worked non-stop to give Atari what they wanted, but of course, as has now legendarily been proven the case in gaming history, it didn't pan out. Things went topsy-turvy pretty soon after the game's December release, and the Christmas rush was over. Critics tore E.T. apart, and bemused consumers returned the game to shops en masse, plunging Atari, who had spent an unconscionable $5 million on advertising, into the red. Thanks to the subsequent video game crash of 1983, Warshaw was credited with bringing down the entire industry. Howard Scott himself openly admitted the game was not good, and there were too many opportunities where players could suddenly wind up in odd situations and suffer literal pitfalls and instant deaths. He's never taken full ownership of single-handedly, if not temporarily, destroying the gaming industry, as that one's on Atari. Number 1. Doom 4/Doom 2016. 2016's sublime Doom reboot almost never was, or at least it was almost something rather different. Conceived of and announced as Doom 4 in 2008, the game underwent an extensive development cycle with a variety of different designs before time was called in 2011 and it was restarted. According to id Software executive producer Marty Stratton, the Doom 4 project was cancelled and reworked into 2016's Doom because it just didn't fit with the franchise, and threatened to take the IP in a totally different direction, possibly for good. Loaded with more cinematics and story, less action, and a totally different game feel, Doom 4 was attempting to match and compete with what the studio saw as its biggest competitor at the time, Call of Duty. It abandoned the core elements of the Doom brand, and despite 3 years being spent on the game, id Software had to do the one thing every developer never wants: to pull the plug. It was doubly risky for id, who in the 12-year stretch leading up to Doom 2016 only put out one other major system release, Rage. But players the world over are thankful they took responsibility for such a potentially terrible game and spent the time necessary to give us one of the best ones of all time instead.